Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Hope that you are fine. Today we are going to move to chapter 1 in our story, Oliver Twist for 6th primary by Charles Dickens. Actually, last time we have mentioned some new information about our author, about the main elements of the story, and also we just knew something about the introduction of Oliver Twist and his first moments in his life. So now we are going to move to chapter 1 in order to see what happened to this poor boy next. So, are you ready? Okay. Early days. Actually, this is the title of our chapter. Early days. From the title, what can you guess? This chapter is going to be about what? Of course, it's going to be about the early or the first years in Oliver Twist's life. Okay, so let's see what happened. In the introduction, actually, we have stopped at the moment of the death of his mother, as she saw him for the first and last time in her life. And although the kid was very weak and he was very ill, but actually he didn't die. Okay, so let's see what happened. The orphan boy didn't die. So, what does it mean, orphan? Yes, exactly. Orphan is a kid or a child that doesn't have a mother or a father alive. Okay, so the orphan boy means a kid or a child which doesn't have a mother or a father alive. And Mr. Bumble, do you remember who is Mr. Bumble? Yes, exactly, the beadle of the parish. Mr. Bumble gave him a name. Actually, they used to give the kid's name by the order of the alphabet. So it was the turn or it was the time to use letter T. So they named the boy Twist, Oliver Twist. Okay, Miss, but Oliver starts with O. Why did you say there was starting with T? Okay, let me tell you something. In Europe, they used to name the people or name the kids with the name of the father first. So they mention the name of the father, then mention the name of the kid. For example, if your name is Ahmed Hani, so in Europe it's going to be mentioned as Hani first, then Ahmed. Okay, so did you understand this part? Okay, so the name of the boy was Oliver Twist and Mr. Bumble was the one who gave him this name. Oliver was now 11 years old. He was pale, thin child. So what does it mean pale? Yes, his face turned white or a little bit yellow because of the little amount of food. So what happened to be in this case? Okay, let me tell you what happened. Actually, Oliver Twist, in order to be in the workhouse, he used to work for a very long time in a factory. His job was to do something in the factory which is a kind of job or kind of work that needs effort. But actually, in the workhouse, they didn't provide him what he needs from food. The only meal that all the kids in the workhouse used to have was 3 bowls of gruel. Do you know what is gruel? Okay, let me remind you with this. Gruel is a very thin soup made of oats and water. Only this. And with a very little amount, they used to eat this 3 times a day. Of course, this wasn't enough to feed the kids, especially with the great efforts they used to do. So, Oliver and also all the other kids in the workhouse were pale and thin. The evening came, and one day all the boys decided to discuss the matter between them. They gathered together and starting to say, oh, what are we going to do with this? We are not having enough food and we work for a long time, so what are we going to do? We need something which is going to put a limit for this. So what happened next? Actually, after this meeting, they decided that we are going to choose one of us in order to ask for more food. Okay, it's a little bit risky, but we think they are not going to refuse, as we are asking for only more food. And then, after long discussions, they decided to choose Oliver to be the one who is going to do this task. Next day, when the evening came, and all the boys just came back to the workhouse and they started to have their dinner, they stood in a line and then they waited for their bowls of gruel. They ate very quickly because they were starving, they were very hungry. And after this, they just looked to each other and then they looked to Oliver, hoping that he is going to success in his task. Oliver started to move, but he was really very afraid. But also he was very hungry. At least to have more food is not a crime, okay? So, carrying his bowl, he walked up to the master of the workhouse, who is responsible for giving food to the children there. Oliver took a very deep breath and then came near to the master and started to say with a very weak voice, "Please, sir, I want some more," he whispered. What happened? The master said in a surprise, "What? What did you say?" Oliver repeated, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master gave a great shriek. He shouted. He became very angry. And then he took hold of Oliver by the collar of his thin shirt like this. And he shouted, "Get the beadle! Bring Mr. Bumble here!" The master was very angry. Oliver was just looking like this. What did I do? I just asked for more food. What did I do? Is it a crime? In few minutes, Mr. Bumble came. And if I ask you to describe Mr. Bumble, what are you going to say? Okay, let's see. He was a bad-tempered, big, fat man. He was quick-tempered. What does it mean, quick-tempered? It means that he got very angry without having a reason. And he was very big and very fat. But he wore a big hat and carried a long, thin stick. By the way, he used to punish the disobeying child with this. He used to punish the disobeying children and kids by this stick. "Well, what's the matter?" Mr. Bumble asked angrily. "Oliver Twist, this boy has asked for more," the master cried. Cried here doesn't have the meaning of crying like this, but cried here means shouting. "Asked for more?" Mr. Bumble repeated. He glared at Oliver like this. He was staring at him. And then he said, "He is asking us for more? This boy is very bad." And then he just looked at Oliver Twist and he said very bad words to him. He said to Oliver, "You will be hanged one day because you are going to be a criminal." Then he talked to the master and said, "Give him to me." Now, what was the punishment that Mr. Bumble did made with Oliver Twist? Mr. Bumble took hold of Oliver and he beat the poor child with his long stick. When the beadle was tired, he just pushed Oliver and threw him onto the ground in front of all the boys. Why did he do so? In order to make all the other boys feeling very afraid, and they are not going to think about asking for more food ever. Okay? And then he continued, lock the boy in a dark room. What does it mean to lock someone in a room? Yes, to put someone in a room and then close the room very well. So Mr. Bumble said, lock the boy in the dark room, then he must leave the workhouse. He can't stay here. He will be sold as an apprentice. And I wanted to tell you something. The apprentice is such, what can I say, kind of assistant to someone. He learned how to do a particular job and then he can do the same job after this. Okay? The next day, a notice was put outside the workhouse. This notice was saying, parish boy for sale. £5 will be paid to anyone who will take a parish boy as an apprentice or assistant. Actually, Oliver sat in the dark room in the cellar. What does it mean, cellar? It's room below ground level in a house to store wine and coal, and sometimes they store some food in it. They locked him in very dark and cold room. Oliver was very sad. He was feeling very cold and hungry and also very afraid. Now, I'm going to talk about the thoughts of Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist just sat like this inside the room and kept thinking, if I stay here, I will die. But a new master may kill me also. So the best solution is to run away. I will run away. And then the night was cold and very dark. Then Oliver climbed carefully out of the window. He hurried along the roads and the quiet streets in order to go where? Yes, he decided to go to London. And he thought that London is a very large place and also it's very far from the workhouse. So Mr. Bumble is not going to be able to find him easily. And as it's a very large place, he can find a job there and maybe find a place to stay in. But actually it was really hard. Oliver walked along the streets for 7 days. 7 days without food, without any money, without even having a place to stay in. So how did he keep himself walking for 7 days? It's really a long time. Yes, Oliver used it to sleep on the pavement in a very cold weather in the street. And he also used it to beg for some food when he feel very hungry. So he used to beg the people to give him food in order to eat. So what does it mean to beg someone? To beg someone for something means to ask him to give you something without having money, without paying money, like begging for food or even begging for money also. So Oliver Twist used it to beg the people for food. Most of the time, he was hungry. Now, at last, Oliver reached a small town near London. But he was in a very, very bad, bad case. His case was really bad. He was too hungry and he was exhausted, which means feeling very tired. He sat down by the side of the road. He just put his head between his hands like this and he started to cry. At the same time, a strange looking boy was standing on the other side of the road. The boy, now let me ask you a question first. Okay, can you describe this boy? Let's see. The boy had a small nose that turned up at the end, like this, and a very dirty face. He wore a man's coat which was far too big for him. His old hat was on the back of his head. Actually, do you think he was good-looking or bad-looking person? Of course, he was very bad-looking person, actually. The boy stood there for minutes. He was watching Oliver. His hands were in his pockets, and then he kept watching Oliver twist with his very sharp little eyes. Then when he found that Oliver didn't move and there was no one around him, he walked over to Oliver and started to speak. "Hello, what's the matter with you?" the strange boy asked. When Oliver just heard his sound, he started to cry over again. "I'm very tired and I'm very hungry and everything's very bad." So he started to cry more and more and more. The boy said, "Hungry? Okay, I'll buy some food for you. Come with me." A few minutes later, Oliver was eating bread and meat. And actually, it was the first time in Oliver's life to eat bread and meat. And then after eating, the strange looking boy started to speak. "Hi, my friends call me the Artful Dodger." The boy said. "Are you going to London?" the boy asked Oliver. Then Oliver replied, "Yes, I am." Okay. Got any place to sleep or to stay in?" Then the Dodger asked again. Oliver answered sadly and honestly, "No, I don't have." Okay. Then after a while, Oliver asked the strange-looking boy again, and he said, "Do you live in London?" The Artful Dodger replied, "Yes, I do, and I'm going there tonight. I know an old gentleman there. He will give you a place to sleep in." As I said, the Artful Dodger was really bad-looking person, but actually Oliver Twist was really naive and innocent. He couldn't imagine that this boy may be a criminal or a bad person. Although he was thinking that this boy gave me food and he also helped me to find a place to sleep in. So of course he's going to be a good man or a good boy. So he said, "Okay, I'm going to come with you." They walked and walked along narrow, dirty streets. So do you think this was in rich or poor part of the country? Actually, it was very poor part. And then suddenly, when they reached London, they stopped at a strange-looking house. The Dodger stopped in front of the door, and then he whistled like this. And when after whistling, the door opened, and then Oliver just saw broken stairs, and inside the house it was a little bit dark and dirty also. At this time, exactly at this moment, the Artful Dodger pushed Oliver in order to enter this house. To this point, I think we have reached the end of our chapter. So I want all of you please to move with me to slide number 2 in order to go through the main points quickly. The orphan's life in the workhouse, the meeting they had and their decision, Oliver's punishment, Oliver's escape from the workhouse. On slide number 3, here I'm going to mention some questions that I have asked you in this chapter. Was Oliver's life in the workhouse interesting? Of course not. What was the result of the boys' meeting? How did the beadle punish Oliver? Did all the boys escape from the workhouse? Of course not. It's not logical. Now let's move to slide number 4. in order to revise the new words. Parish, small district or area typically having its own church and community. And of course, you know the meaning of a beadle? Yes, the parish officer or the one or the man who is responsible for the parish. Gruel, thin liquid soup made from oats and water. This parrot, which means ready to do something which is difficult and dangerous. And actually this was the case of the boys when they decided to have a meeting and to put a limit for this, what can I say, for this miserable life that they had in the workhouse. Okay, now let's move to slide number 5. Glared, looked at someone angrily. Hanged, put to death by hanging, like this, the criminal by a rope for his head. An apprentice, a young person who worked for somebody for a number of years and learned how to do a particular job. Begged someone, like Oliver, when he asked the people for food because he had no money to buy any. Whistled, yes, to make a noise through a small hole between your lips. Now let's move to the questions. Slide number 7. When did Oliver's mother die? Actually, she died soon after his birth. What did Mrs. Corney take from Oliver's mother? Do you remember? Yes, she took the chain from the girl's neck and she held the locket in her hands. What were the workhouses? They were places where poor people made to live, but they were terrible places, and people who lived there used to have very hard and very miserable life. They used to work for a very long time and they didn't get anything in return, not enough food, no good place to stay in, and so on. Moving to slide number 8. Please, sir, I want some more comment. For this question, we need to say who said these words, to who, and in what occasion or why did he say these words. These words actually were said by Oliver Twist to the master of the workhouse when he was still hungry, and he also was chosen by the other boys in order to do this task and ask for more food for all of them. Okay, how was Oliver punished when he asked for more food? First, he was badly beaten by the beadle. Then he was locked in a very dark room to be sold later as an apprentice. Why did Oliver choose London to run away? Because it's quite far from Mr. Bumble, so he couldn't find him easily, and also London is a very large place where he can find a job, and also he can find a place to stay in. Let's move to slide number 9 and with question number 7. Describe the beadle of the parish. Do you remember when we described Mr. Bumble? Yes, he was very big, bad-tempered, fat man. He used to wear fine clothes and big hat, and also he used to, yes, exactly, hold a long thin stick to punish the disobeying children. Who used to give the orphans their names? Mr. Bumble. He gave their names using the alphabet order. What did Mr. Bumble do with Oliver? He beat the poor child with his stick, and then he threw him onto the ground in front of all of his friends, and then he locked him in a dark room to be sold later. Now let's move to slide number 10, and with the second question, complete the following sentences. All workhouse children were what and what? They were what? Yes, of course, they were thin and ill. Can we use the word pale? Yes, you can. So you can use thin or ill or pale. The boys in the workhouse chose Oliver to do what? To ask for more food. Now, can you guess what's going to happen next in the next chapter after being in this strange looking house? Thank you so much. I enjoyed my session with you, so I'm going to meet you in the next chapter. Thank you.